Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're jumping right into Ireland's shifting economic landscape. Now, look, everybody's talking about the cost of living right now, right? You hear it at the office, at the grocery store, all over social media. But today, we're going to put on our sociologist hats and look past those top-level inflation numbers. We're going to examine the hidden, incredibly uneven impact this is having on our daily lives. So, let's dive right in.
First things first, we've got to ask who is actually getting hit the hardest here. Because there's this really common myth floating around that we are all in the exact same boat, just kind of riding out the exact same economic storm together. But honestly, when you start breaking the population down into specific demographic groups, you uncover completely different realities. We aren't in the same boat at all. We are in entirely different vessels, just dealing with the exact same weather.
And that leads us to the illusion of a shared crisis. Some are pressured, some manage, and some barely feel it. Seriously, if you take two people earning the exact same salary, they can have totally different day-to-day experiences based entirely on their underlying assets, their living situations, and their family status. One person might literally be stretched to their absolute breaking point, while the other, believe it or not, is managing just fine or barely feeling the pinch. Your experience of this crisis depends completely on your context.
Section 1. Demographic divides. Housing, the structural divide.
Let's systematically dismantle that shared crisis myth right away, starting with the absolute front line of this whole thing, the housing market. The contrast here is just stark. On one side, you have renters. Renters take the hit immediately. They're completely exposed to volatile market prices with virtually zero financial buffer. But then, on the flip side, you have homeowners, who bought a few years back. They are largely insulated by fixed-rate mortgages. So even as inflation swirls all around them, their single biggest monthly expense stays remarkably stable.
To put that into perspective, just think about this number, 2,000 euros. Right now, in many areas across Ireland, 2,000 euros a month is the standard rent. Actually, in some places, it's even higher. Renters are having to absorb these massive, direct hits to their income every single month, which instantly evaporates any extra cash they might have used to cover other rising costs, like food or heating.
Section 2. Demographic divides. Permanent barriers for youth.
Let's talk about young workers who are just starting their careers, because they are facing a historically unique challenge right now. The traditional ladder of progress used to be pretty straightforward. Step 1, save. Step 2, move out. Step 3, progress. But for a lot of youth today, that ladder has essentially turned into a brick wall. With rent swallowing up such a massive chunk of their income, savings is basically impossible. And without savings, you can't progress. Add in the wage growth gap between them and older, more established professionals, and the starting line for just building a normal life has fundamentally shifted completely out of reach for a lot of people.
Section 3. Demographic divides. Childcare and compounding pressures.
Now, let's shift over to families. Because when you add dependents into the mix, the financial pressure doesn't just add up, it multiplies rapidly. Think about the slices of a household budget pie: housing, food, transport, and childcare. For dual-income families, you'd assume they have a bit of a financial advantage, right? But the compounding pressure of these specific essential costs leaves them with practically zero flexibility. Every single essential slice of that pie is growing, completely squeezing out any breathing room they might have had.
And childcare is often the final tipping point. In Ireland, childcare conceptually acts as the second rent. It effectively doubles that already massive housing burden we talked about earlier. Just imagine paying your rent and then turning right around and paying it again just so you can actually go to work. It's wild. This is exactly what turns a tight financial squeeze into a permanent structural divide for families who are just trying to stay afloat.
But, as we said, the impact is uneven. We also have to talk about the insulated groups. We're looking at older homeowners with low mortgages, folks in high-paying sectors with strong wage growth, and citizens holding appreciating assets. Do they still face higher grocery bills? Yes, for sure. But they have built-in buffers, like equity and savings, to soften that blow. And sociologically, this is fascinating. It creates this massive perception gap in our society. One group genuinely feels the economy is totally manageable, while another finds it completely unsustainable. And from their own distinct vantage points, they are both absolutely right.
Section 4. Geographic and psychological toll. Mapping the pressure.
Let's step beyond demographics for a second and map out how this pressure changes based on exactly where you live. In urban centers, like Dublin, for example, citizens are just crushed by sky-high rent and inflated local prices, even though they have access to more job opportunities. But then, look at the rural experience. Housing might be slightly cheaper out there, but steep transport costs and a lack of services create a totally different trap. You might save some money on rent only to burn that exact difference in your gas tank just getting back and forth to work.
To really make sense of this, we need to weigh the global pressures against local amplifiers. On one side, we have global stuff that's totally out of our immediate control, energy prices influenced by geopolitics and the Strait of Hormuz, or global supply chain hiccups. But on the other side, we have our local amplifiers, housing supply, local infrastructure, and regional policy decisions. Those global factors push the costs up, sure, but it's our local environment that determines exactly how hard those hits are felt by people on the ground.
Now, here's what doesn't show up on a spreadsheet, and it's absolutely crucial: the hidden toll. Constant, low-level pressure. We are talking about the unquantifiable, chronic stress of constantly watching your budget tighten. The endless mental gymnastics of sitting at the kitchen table trying to decide what to cut this month. This emotional pressure fundamentally alters how people live, how they plan for their future, and how they interact with their community.
And you have to wonder, where does this all lead? Well, financial strain inevitably accumulates. It starts with rising prices over a few months. That turns into tightened budgets over a few quarters. Then that morphs into years of chronic stress. And sociologically speaking, when enough people feel that sustained pressure with no release valve, it inevitably boils over into visible, physical frustration and societal breaking points, like the projections for the 2026 Irish fuel protests. That pressure has to go somewhere.
Section 5, the long-term societal shift. What happens next?
Zooming back out to the macroeconomic view, how does this uneven crisis shape the actual future of the country? Well, because the problem isn't uniform, there is absolutely no single silver bullet solution. You can't fix a renter's crisis with a homeowner's policy, right? Young people need completely different support structures than retirees. We need multi-layered, complex responses that tackle an issue like childcare very differently than energy. And rolling out all these distinct strategies takes serious time.
This quote perfectly captures the core sociological takeaway today. When pressure builds unevenly, it doesn't just disappear, it accumulates. This widening gap between those who are insulated and those who are fully exposed, it's going to spread. It's going to dictate consumer spending, it's going to alter our social behavior, and ultimately, it will fundamentally reshape the economy itself.
So, the biggest thing we want you to take away today is this. We are no longer just looking at a financial deficit where things are a little bit more expensive. We are looking at a permanent structural fracture. This divide is permanently defining how citizens experience the country they live in. Whether you have a buffer or whether you are completely exposed dictates your entire reality.
Which leaves us with a really vital question to think about. If the gap between the insulated and the exposed continues to widen, what kind of society are we actually building for the future? Take a look at your own situation. Which side of the fracture are you standing on right now? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this gave you a new way to understand the true cost of living. Catch you next time.